Hello, everybody, and a special hello to Alex Gray.
Hello.
We have known each other a long time. How old were you when we first met?
I was 16 when we first met.
And what were you doing?
So I was a volunteer counsellor at Childline. I had just joined.
And that was in Glasgow?
Yep, that was in Glasgow 19 years ago.
Wow. So you probably know this, but I was adamantly against us recruiting young people as young as that to be counsellors. Do we still do it?
Yeah, we still have 16-year-old volunteers, and we still actively recruit, thankfully, people from the age of 16.
Now, when Childline started, what we were hearing children describing was a huge shock to me. And I found it very distressing. You know, it was a very steep, as they say, steep learning curve for me. And I was worried that young people might get badly hurt by hearing the sorts of things that children were describing. And I was told by our then CEO, Valerie Howarth, now she has developed a first name, which is Baroness, Valerie Howarth, that actually not all 16-year-olds are the same, and some will find it distressing, but others will not. And the fact that they can identify so closely with young people, particularly on topics like bullying, is an advantage. So tell me how wrong I was, Alex, because clearly you have not been destroyed by the experience of hearing what children and people were saying. Can you remember, were you traumatized at all? Was it difficult?
Yeah, I definitely don't say this very often, but yes, Esther, you were very wrong. Yeah, I think I was definitely daunted when I came in to become a Childline volunteer, a bit kind of rabbit in the headlights. And I remember back to my training group when I was in there as a 16-year-old, and I was with another man who was in the group who was 60. And I was just thinking, wow, what can I bring? Like, this man has all this life experience. What can I as a 16-year-old? And I think through the training, I quite quickly realised I have a lot of really relevant experience. At that time, I was actually still at school. So I was having daily experience, which was really relevant to Childline. And I just think through the training, I just grew in resilience. I grew in confidence. I knew exactly where the support was. And I never felt deeply traumatized by anything. And I think just that level of support that you got meant that I could do it. And they made me feel like I could do it as well, which was really important.
So when did you move to London?
So I moved to London just after I graduated. So my first degree is in politics. So I wanted to be a political researcher or a politician even, or a teacher of politics. And I had this real head and heart moment because I'd been volunteering for Childline, I think for 4 years-ish at that point, 5 years even. Head and heart, what do I do? What do I follow? Spoiler alert, I followed my heart and joined Childline as a Childline supervisor, moved to London, and yeah, I've never really looked back since.
So that was your first job?
Absolutely, it was my first job. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. So let me talk to you a little bit about your own childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Glasgow.
And tell me about your family.
Really supportive family. I had a really good childhood. I had really supportive parents who were always encouraging me, especially in school, so encouraging me to do my homework, etc. And then encouraging me with my career as well. I have a younger sister who I'm really, really close to. She's one of my best friends. And it wasn't always that way. I think her teenage years were quite difficult for me when she was a moody teenager. But yeah, we're very good friends now. And yeah, just that really supportive environment, really nice memories of amazing long summers, family holidays, that type of thing.
So have you had an experience in your life, for example, bullying, that means that you empathise with the young people?
Well, I think at school, I wasn't necessarily bullied myself. I wasn't bullied, but I did see it around me. So I could see it happening in school. I could see people being targeted, being bullied. It's one of the reasons that we actually started a peer support system in school. So these were my kind of baby steps into Childline, where I was supporting.
Did you start that yourself?
We did, yeah. It was a group of students and one teacher who started the peer support system just to offer that drop-in at lunchtime for children who were struggling or being bullied, quite a few of them. So yeah, it was my first dipping my toe in the water of supporting children.
All this talk about sexual assault, harassment has made me remember what happened in a school I went to. And in fact, it's quite interesting because it was girls doing it to girls.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think we have to be open-minded about this. And I remember talking to Valerie Howarth about some of the abuse reported to us, which was child on child. And she said to me, you have to remember that both the perpetrator and the victim, they're both children. So you have to deal with it appropriately. That's not to excuse it.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that we've always had at Childline, is that we do speak to young people who are causing harm to others, to other young people, to their siblings, for example. And yeah, completely. There's the factor that what they're doing is completely wrong, but there's definitely a support need there for those young people as well. Yeah. And it's something that is important that we respond to.
So there you were, coming to London. You joined staff. Now, was that a different experience from being a volunteer?
I think it was a different experience. I think there were more expectations on me, definitely. But I think there were a lot of similarities. So I'd already developed quite a bit as a volunteer, and just that volunteering gave me such a good foundation, I think, to then move on to the staff team and be a supervisor. I kind of got it. I knew where the volunteers were coming from. I knew what the training experience was like. I knew what those first few shifts in the counselling room were like, and was able to then use that as a staff member.
And so you were a supervisor. By that time, we had merged with the NSPCC, had we?
Yep, when I moved, we'd merged. So we merged when I was still in Glasgow.
I see. Wow, well, that was a big shift, wasn't it? When we went from being an independent, agile, nimble, little, insolvent charity. That's the problem, isn't it? You can be nimble, you can be absolutely entirely centered on the service you're providing and go bust. That is the problem. So thanks to the NSPCC, not only were we suddenly solvent, we had all that financial structure around us, but we were enabled to launch out into, online counselling, online emails, all those things, which, again, I've got a history of being wrong with you, Alex. I wasn't entirely sure that children would find it as warm and supportive, just relating on a screen as against listening to someone's voice. What's been your experience?
I think, when I think back to those days when we were a phone-only service, and those Childline posters of the child in the phone box with the massive phone, and just how those days really are gone almost, and just the explosion in the online service, I think it's fair to say it was a big learning curve for us. So when we first moved into one-to-one counselling, I remember trying things like basic reflection, and the young people being really confused and thinking, well, are you just copying and pasting what I've just said to you? Are you a robot? What's going on here? So it took quite a lot of us having to adapt to online services, new medium. But one of the things I love about Childline happened at this time, and it's that we learned from the children and young people who used the service. They told us what we were doing well. They told us what we needed to improve on, and they shaped that. And the service we have today is thanks to those children and young people speaking to us and helping shape the service that we deliver to them. And I think that's such a privilege to have that that knowledge.
Yes, but in order to be that kind of service that is child-centered, young person-centered, you have to have bosses who do not try and control you. They try and empower you, but they don't try and control you. And it has always worried me, because the temptation of any boss, and I'm not pointing my finger at anyone, but I have worked outside Childline, as you know, and the temptation for any boss is to take control. You think you see it so clearly, and that other people are old-fashioned, unwilling to change, don't understand modern management, blah-de-blah. And so you stop listening to the grassroots, to the people who are delivering the service, in our case, the people who are listening to children, and you start telling people what they need to do. And we have had moments, you know, in Childline's history where I was worried about that. Would you recognise that?
Yeah, I think we definitely have, when we've kind of lost sight of that a bit. I think my personal opinion is we're in a really good place now. And I think we listen to what young people are telling us, we listen to what volunteers are telling us, we listen to what staff are telling us. And I think just the very fact that my new role has been created, I think just shows the importance of volunteers, shows the importance of our volunteer coordinators in bases. You know, now that we have someone who will head up volunteering operations, just shows, you know, volunteers are the lifeblood of the organisation, and it's so important that we listen to them. And I think that's what I want to bring to the role, is that volunteer voice is so important.
So you've now got, how many bases do we say we have now? Because we used to say we had 12.
Oh, yes.
But now we've got our online base, and we've got our remote base, haven't we? So have we got 14 now? Have we?
We have 13 bases.
Oh, let's
lucky for some.
Let's get another one quickly. So, and they're all very different. And this is another thing that I think big organizations have difficulty understanding, that you can be consistent, but you don't have to be uniform. That actually Glasgow is different from Nottingham, has a different constituency. You know, you recruit people differently. I remember when I was in Derry, London Derry, I better call it Foyle, hadn't I? And people were looking with bewilderment at some of the materials they'd got, which were quite inappropriate for recruiting volunteers in their community. I even remember going to Wales and being shown the material they'd got, which was illegal because it wasn't bilingual. So how are you going to ensure that we keep this diversity of community, of recruitment materials, all those things?
Yeah, I think it's so vital that we do protect that and maintain that. You know, you and I have spent a lot of time traveling around bases, and just the difference between the bases, but all working towards exactly the same thing. And there is a consistency amongst the bases with that level of difference built into them. I think it makes us rich as an organisation. I really do love that. For me, how am I going to maintain that? I think through the volunteer coordinators. So these are the people who are on the ground, listening to volunteers, speaking with volunteer voice, many of them volunteers themselves, and just ensuring that it's not this kind of top-down approach, that we're actually listening what works in bases, because like you said, you know, what works for Prestatyn is going to be completely different for London, for example. And it's important that we adapt to that if we're going to be successful. So I think just listening to volunteer coordinators and to volunteers and staff teams across the country is going to be key to that, so that I can understand what works for them.
That is very interesting. What about, here's the thing that worries me. If you take something like our CRM, okay. Now, you know that it's been clunky from the moment it's been introduced. And for some reason, I mean, we had an independent review of it, and the review came back and said, well, 3 of the, whatever you call it, screens, pages, don't work. And they were the 3 that the volunteers used. So How far are you going to enable volunteers to use, and we've got volunteers who have so many IT skills, let alone everything else, to use their nous and their experience to influence the mechanics of what we're working with, to make sure that we are as effective and efficient, really, without losing any of our warmth? How are you going to do that?
I think for me, it just comes back to, it's a bit like modeling what we do on the helpline. It's actually listening. It's listening to what people have to say, tapping into their expertise, and then speaking with their voice. So representing them. When I'm at senior management team, representing what they've actually told me. And I think there are good examples of that working well within Childline. I would actually use CRM as an example of that, because I think what we have now is much more user-friendly. And that is thanks to the feedback that we got through the review from volunteers. And it's so important that we make one of the absolute key tools that they use fit for purpose. So I think we need to listen to them. I'm also quite a big fan of, I don't know how we want to brand them, but working groups and involving volunteers in that as well. So getting together to tackle a particular issue or a particular thing that the service is seeing, and just hearing from a really wide range of views what the potential solutions are, and tapping into those, amazing volunteers that have amazing skills and brilliant jobs in the outside world as well, which is really useful for us.
I remember somebody had the great idea of centralising everything, and I was told that, for example, there was a volunteer information meeting in Liverpool, and someone tried to find our base in Liverpool and couldn't. And the only phone number they had and the only contact they had was in Birmingham, where there was nobody who knew how to get them out of wherever they were and get them to the base. Have we stopped doing that? Have we stopped over-centralising stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I think local bases have quite a bit of autonomy. They can shape things, but that's not to say that it's not supported centrally. So we've got amazing support teams within the volunteering team, for example, who are there to support local bases, local team managers, local volunteer coordinators. I work quite closely with them too. But it is in that support function. It isn't kind of being dictated to, as I think you were alluding to. And I think that's the way it should work. And I think sometimes the amazing ideas that we get from local bases just spark something off in other bases, and we can all learn from each other. And I think with the creation of my new role, I'm working nationally across the country. I have a really kind of privileged position that I have local volunteer coordinators who I will line manage in local bases. And I think I was just thinking about how we can support each other nationally, but still delivering locally is so important.
Now, one of the things we're not good at is retention. If you look at Samaritans, I remember someone telling me that she'd got some sort of certificate for being a Samaritan for 25 years, but that was nothing because you had volunteers who'd been there for 45 years and so on. And we know that there's a rapid turnover with a lot of our volunteers. So how are you going to combat that? How are you going to turn them all into mini Alexes who stays with us for decades?
Well, I think there are a few things in place that are gradually building and growing at the moment. So we've got the new volunteer recognition systems in place, where there are different milestones that volunteers meet. And from what I've heard, speaking to volunteers, that's something that's really valued. So in terms of the time that they're giving us, we've just recently relaunched the volunteer development pathway as well. So volunteers can start to think about how they want to develop different roles that they might be able to move into, something which is dear to my heart because I wouldn't be where I am today without learning the things that I did as a volunteer. And just listening to volunteers as well. Again, what works for them, what doesn't. We've done various reviews. We have surveys for volunteers quite often, and it's just ensuring that we are actually taking learning from that and we're actually implementing things based on it. and it's not just a tick box exercise, that we're actually implementing what they say. And that's, as well as things like volunteer forums, local volunteer forums, national volunteer forums. Esther, I know you're always happy to engage with people, so perhaps involving you in that too. And just as with a lot of things in Childline, it comes back to listening.
Were you ever at a moment where you thought, I want to leave?
I have been at a moment where I thought, okay, scary thought, I'm actually going to leave Childline. I'm going to go and get a job elsewhere. But I've always come back to what we do and the power of what we do. And I just think that is pretty unique. I think we're in a really unique position. We're in a privileged position to hear the stories that young people tell us and to be able to actually do things about it, to speak to government, to speak to other organisations and actually change things for the better for children and young people. And I think I get huge motivation from our volunteers. So volunteers come from all walks of life, all different life experiences, and we're all there aiming for exactly the same thing, for the same purpose, same goals. And I think that is pretty special. And I've not really read a job ad that's kind of matched that, I'm afraid. You're stuck with me.
I have seen some wonderful counselling in Childline bases by an undertaker and by a blacksmith. I agree with you. We have such wonderful richness of experience, in all our volunteers. It's terrific. Talking about children now, because I know that's why we are both totally passionately committed to Childline.
Yeah.
Have you had any interaction with children yourself that sticks in your mind that you will always remember?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's a lot of contacts to think about there. I think probably the one that mostly sticks with me was a young male, because I think, as we know, males are less likely to contact Childline. So it was a pretty unusual experience. And it was all the more unusual because it was a young male who was involved in gangs and grooming. He was being groomed. And I just think, listening to this really young voice, it was a voice contact, listening to this really young voice speak about a world that I had no knowledge or connection to, a very adult world, a very dangerous, a very violent world. Having that little voice describe it was just mind-blowing, really, that, a young person, I can't remember exactly how young he was, but we're talking early teens, was aware of this world and involved in this world and exposed to this world. And I will never forget, we had long conversations about the level of risk that the young person was facing. And I think quite a few of the managers at that time were quite worried about the level of risk this very young person was facing and what we should do with it in terms of confidentiality, who we should speak to. So we started to explore this with the young person, as we do. And I will never forget how strongly he fought against speaking to anyone else and how clearly he said Childline are the absolute only people I can speak to about this. And we hear that time and time again, that if it wasn't for Childline, who would help these young people? Who would these young people actually go to and speak to? So I think that the fact that we were there for that young person, and we're talking, this contact's probably from about 10 years ago, and it's still in my mind just because it encapsulates why we're here and why we do what we do in the way that we do as well.
Absolutely. And of course, he was right. And this is the thing. I have spoken to adult survivors who said, I was told, I told whoever it was trying to help me that my mother wouldn't believe me, and my mother didn't believe me. Or, I was told that terrible things would happen if I asked for help, and terrible things did happen. Sometimes the child recognizes, the real risks, the real environment, and we have to listen to them. We're coming back again to what you and I have so often, listen and empower. Is there anything you would change about Childline?
I think it's a very interesting question because I think we're always changing. And I think I think the way I would answer that is a bit strange because I think I would say more of the same to do something different, because what I mean by that is that we always need to remain relevant. You know, we are not the same organization as we were when you launched Childline all those years back, or when I joined Childline all those years back. We must always remain relevant. If we're not relevant to children and young people, there's absolutely no point in us being here because they won't come to us. So I think we need to constantly be changing. We need to be almost ahead of the curve so that we're there for children and young people when they need us. And I think that's something that we've done really successfully through our history, thinking about the launch of online services, for example, when we were a pioneering organisation in offering that for children. And also thinking about the pandemic and how we've been able to respond to that when we've really, really challenged ourselves, had some really difficult conversations about the service we offer and how we can offer that under really challenging circumstances. And one of the things that makes me really proud is that we did that. We maintained the service through one of the most challenging times in our history, and that involved delivering the service in a really, really different way with the launch of the virtual base than we had even imagined before. And I think that
is people working from home, answering emails, which I think is brilliant. And of course, you know, one of our longest serving volunteers is doing that now. So, I mean, people are learning all the time, aren't they? So how many years have you been with us, Alex, in all?
So since I was 16, so doing quick maths, 19 years altogether, including my volunteering.
So do you want still to be in Childline in 19 years to come?
I'm never going to say no to that. Absolutely, I still want to be here, and I still want to feel as passionate as I do today, and I'm sure I will.
I think you qualified as a social worker while you were working for us.
Yeah, I did. I went off and did my master's in social work. So yeah, it was really good way to complement what I do at Childline. But I think I, again, quite quickly realised how much experience I took into that role in my studies there. You know, I remember sitting at seminars and people just being fixated on the work that Childline does and the power of what we do as well.
Right, so I'm going to give you this challenge because my daughter also did a master's in social work, having studied psychology. And at no stage in her master's degree was Childline mentioned. So I want you to go out, wherever you go. Now you've got this very important role, Alex, and representing the organisation. Please, please, please tell social workers to offer us as a resource to the non-disclosing child who they think may be unsafe, and explain to them what we do, because it's been a long time since we moved out into those worlds. So that's your challenge from me.
I accept, Esther.
Thank you very much. I've got some other challenges. What is your favourite sandwich, Alex Gray?
Oh, slightly easier challenge. People always laugh at me because at lunchtime I will go out off to get a sandwich with these big ideas that I'm going to do something different, and I always come back with a tuna sandwich. I'm quite boring like that, but I love tuna.
So do I. Fair enough. Must be sustainable. There's a terrible new documentary on Netflix, so we have to be careful about our fish. Right, I agree with you. What is the best band you've ever seen?
Oh, best band. Well, the last concert I went to was Sagala, who I saw in Brixton, who were amazing. But I would say the best artist I've ever seen has to be Kylie.
Oh, yeah. Extraordinary. Tiny, tiny little person. Yes, fantastic. What is your fondest childhood memory?
Apart from joining Childline, I would say my fondest memory would be an amazing holiday we had on one of the Greek islands. I can't really remember which was just awesome. The weather was amazing. It felt like as things do when you're a child. It felt like it went on for about 10 weeks and it was probably only 10 days. Just amazing spending time with mum, dad and my sister.
Well, let's hope those days will return. A
Fingers
long
crossed.
time since I planned a holiday anywhere except in my own garden. Marmite, love it or hate it?
Oh, drum roll. I love it.
So do I. In fact, I had it for breakfast. Your defining feature, Alex, is?
I find this one the most difficult question. My defining feature is probably, I would hope it would be how approachable I am and how open to listening to people I am. And I really hope this is something I can bring to the role and be a kind of a sponge to soak up all the ideas that everyone has.
Excellent. I would agree with you. And I never advise anyone, you know me, but my one bit of advice I would give you, if you'll forgive me, Alex, is keep doing a shift.
Yeah.
So no matter how busy you are, no matter how important the next meeting is, no matter what urgent things are piling up in your inbox, if you can keep listening to children, I am sure that all the decisions you make with the volunteers will be informed by what children need. So brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's always a pleasure to meet you, Alex.
You too, Esther.
In 2 years' time, we will both meet in another year's time.
Let's do that.